Good morning and welcome to this webinar on joint ventures and getting it right in the Indian market. I'm Steve Toogood, Regional Director of UK IBC, and will be moderating this session today. In this UK India Business Council webinar, Sandeep Cloud, India expert and Associate Solicitor at Irwin Mitchell, will share his expertise and understanding of doing business in India. He will cover the joint venture environment and advise on finding potential partners, the problems with joint ventures in India, and how to approach drawing up contracts, and more importantly, how Irwin Mitchell can help UK companies navigate the process. Tushar Chaudhary is Head of Launchpad and Client Relations at UK IBC in India, and will also speak about doing business in India and how to go about entering the Indian market. Before we begin, I would like to familiarise you with the toolbox on the right-hand side of your screens. Just to let you know, we will have everyone on mute during the course of the webinar to keep any background noise to a minimum. But if you have a question, please drop it into the little bracket on the toolbox to your right in the Please Type Your Question Here box to send me your question, and I will take it up during our Q&A session at the end. For now, to make sure you can all hear me clearly, could I please ask that you all use the Raise Your Hand button on the toolbar. That's the Raise Your Hand button on the toolbar. Could you please click this button now? Okay, thank you very much. So, to our first speaker, I'm pleased to introduce my friend Sandeep Cloud. Sandeep is associate in the corporate team at national law firm Irwin Mitchell and has particular expertise in mergers and acquisitions. He spent time working in India for one of India's largest corporate law firms and has worked with Indian corporates and individuals making investments outside of India and assisted UK entities with their expansion into the Indian market. He is also an advisory board member of the National Asia Business Association. So Sandeep, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Steve, and good morning, everybody. So the areas of JVs that we'll try to cover in the next 25 minutes or so is a vast subject. So this presentation is not a comprehensive guide to JVs in India, but is more of a brain dump of the information and experience that I've gathered over the past 8 years of working in and out of the Indian market, and especially helping UK businesses enter the Indian market by JV. So moving on to my first slide, listed here are various options of entry into the Indian market, starting with the softer methods of entry and ending with the more permanent. By softer methods of entry, I mean those that are easier to get out of, as we do have a number of clients that like to start the Indian journey with an agency arrangement or a liaison office to test the market, and then with a JV subsidiary or acquisition following such testing of the market to make a more permanent move. For the purposes of this presentation, I'll be concentrating on the joint venture option. Certainly in my experience, it's the entry method of choice for most of my clients, and this is across various sectors including engineering, retail, logistics, manufacturing, and the reason for this will become apparent during the course of the presentation, I hope. There are two distinct types of JVs, and one is a commercial JV where two businesses work out an arrangement to work together for a commercial purpose to achieve a mutually beneficial aim, and the other is an equity JV where the parties set up a newly formed company and divide the shares as agreed, and then this entity is managed and operated as an Indian business. Again, for the purposes of this presentation, I'll be concentrating on the equity JV model, again due to its popularity as an entry tool into the Indian market. So moving on to my next slide. Now, I'm sure everybody on the webinar today has their own business reasons for exploring India as their next or even first foreign market to try and crack. I suspect most of these will involve a huge opportunity that India provides as a growing market in the short and long term. India is not an easy place to do business, and there are various issues that would concern a UK business trying to do and develop business in India. We'll come to some of the key issues faced in more detail later, but put simply, entering into a joint venture with the right partner, I might add, can be an extremely efficient way to enter the Indian market and leverage the Indian party's strengths within a difficult business environment. A JV does in theory allow you to leapfrog your entry into the Indian market by utilising the connections, reach and experience of an established partner. Joint ventures can help overcome foreign direct investment restrictions in certain sectors in India, as certain market sectors remain restricted for foreign investment, and a local partner with certain shareholding in the company is required for commencing business. These FDI restrictions are vast, and I'm unable to go into them in detail today, but I will touch on them a little later on in the presentation. Moving on to my next slide. So a JV may be defined as an arrangement whereby two or more parties cooperate in order to run a business or to achieve a commercial objective. JVs are envisaged as alliances that yield benefits for the JV partners by offering a platform to attain their business goals, which allow difficult or uneconomical to attain independently. Establishing a JV allows you to make use of complementary resources available from the other partner, share each other's capabilities, and access markets that are new to you, obviously such as India. The JV is a great way of reducing research and manufacturing costs while at the same time limiting exposure and jointly managing risk. For those reasons, a JV can take a territory such as India out of the box that makes it a market that is too difficult to do on your own. The JV is a very flexible model and can be tailored to almost any commercially agreed circumstances. And a JV company is usually set up as a limited liability company or a limited liability partnership, with the former being the most common from my experience. Therefore, your exposure to the Indian market is usually limited to the investment that you make into India, and your UK or other international operations will be ring-fenced if the venture is not a success. Although this will not unfortunately ring-fence your reputation and credibility in the market, so it is very important to get it right the first time. As with any partnership, it is advisable that both parties add value and take benefit from the arrangement. Usually I'd find the UK entity would bring experience in a sector, knowledge, know-how, products and IP, and the Indian partner would usually bring Indian business knowledge, contacts, distribution networks, Indian business experience, and even funding. Moving on to my next slide. So thank you. So when looking for an Indian partner, it is important to understand what help you require in India to make your market entry a success. Your Indian partner should be able to plug these gaps in the market that you cannot fill, or that would be time-consuming or uneconomical for the size of your business at this stage. So most UK business will look for help in one of the following areas. So you'd either be looking for distribution networks in order to quickly get your products to market. You'd be looking for a business with established contacts in your industry that can be exploited. Indian contacts and networks can also help when establishing a new factory or industrial unit, for example, and it may help when applying for new licenses or permits required to conduct your business. The Indian partner should have tackled these issues in the past, so you should be able to leapfrog the pain that they have once endured. The e-commerce platform in India is relatively new and very different to the Western model. And for example, payment on delivery is very common and a model that Amazon in India has had to adopt. And due to India's infrastructure challenges, deliveries can be difficult to coordinate, especially if you rely on getting your products to customers fast. So having established delivery networks could also be a huge advantage from an Indian partner. Would you require multi-state presence? A lot of my clients opted to pick a friendly state first, where research tells them it would be a good starting point for their product or services. But some clients do need to take a country-wide approach to best ensure their business is not replicated in other states before they eventually arrive there. So an India partner that's already got networks across the whole of India may be advisable. And just to note that each Indian state is like a separate country. Each has its own language, traditions, religions, tastes, perceptions, taxes, and even ways to do business. Advertisements in one state for the same product will be completely different to another state. A partner that has a grip on your state of choice or the states that you wish to expand to is key to a JV partner decision. In some cases, it may be beneficial to have a number of JVs to cover different geographical areas. If you're unfamiliar with Indian business model, you might be surprised to learn that a lot of businesses are family-run groups. The group will usually have diversified into many different areas and will be covering a lot of different sectors at the same time. In my experience, it's not always the businesses in the same sector that will be the best partners. It could be a partner that has the right distribution network, but they are not currently covering your sector. but want to diversify into your market. They could be hungrier to make it work than a natural competitor, and in India, a natural competitor will need you less as they get accustomed to your products and services and ways of working, but a partner that has less knowledge of your sector and experience may be more reliant on you going forwards. So keeping the upper hand in product and service development to ensure the role of your business remains an important one to the success of the JV is an important balancing act. So moving on to my next slide. So listed here are some of the products and services that Indian businesses will be looking for to enable them to benefit from a joint venture, because it has to be a two-way relationship, otherwise it's not going to work. And these are going to include high-end products and services that can be used in the Indian market, and high-end processes to ensure that the products and services are of consistently high quality, which is a problem for India. New technology that is not yet available in India and that can be utilized in the Indian market. Such technology need not be new products, but could just be an improvement to an existing process or product that improves efficiencies, for example. Any branded product is always welcome in open arms with India, and a British branded product even more so. Moving on to my next slide. So how to locate the more suitable JV partner? I would strongly recommend that you do plenty of research as to exactly what you wish to achieve from the Indian market. This will take time, but with help from organisations like UKIBC and your professional advisors, this can be made easier and your options made much clearer. I've been working in and out of India for some time now, made some good contacts that I'd be happy to share with you, and that could point you in the right direction once you're in India. But I would urge anyone seriously looking at India to speak to your UKIBC representative or sector specialist to ensure that when you are making your market entry decisions, you are equipped with the information that you require. Visiting India is definitely a must. You need to get a feel for the country and where the opportunities lie, as trying to conduct that exercise on paper will not be good enough. Visiting India is mostly important to understand your JV partners or potential JV partners and really getting to know them before you enter into any formal arrangements. Business in India is done on the back of personal relationships, so ensuring that you have a good and trusted relationship with the key decision makers, who are usually the key family members, is vital. It is not recommended that this is done in one trip. You should ensure that you visit regularly and meet the same key people and build up relationships with them, and be cautious if you find yourself meeting with less senior people as your visits carry on, as this could be an indication that they do not see the JV as important as you do, or they have no interest in entering into a formal arrangements, and this could just be wasting your time, because Indian family businesses are well known for being quite polite and will just keep entertaining you without any real desire to do business, unfortunately. So in respect of ensuring the partners is the right one for you and for your business, I'd recommend, from my experience, is that ensure that there is definitely a cultural fit between the personalities that lead your business and between the businesses themselves. So ensure that you share the same values and ethics, and that you don't get into difficult situations in the relationship if tricky decisions need to be made that you're not comfortable with. Avoid entering into equal JVs with a partner that has a much stronger balance sheet than you do, as if the JV requires funding at some point in the future, or the JV is looking to expand, and the Indian partner has much larger pockets than you, and at that point you're unable to afford to pump in more money into the business. This has been known to cause some issues. The same issue can arise when entering into a JV with a partner that has much smaller pockets. From the outset, also ensure that the ambitions and visions of the partner matches yours. An agreed short-term business plan and long-term business plan is always recommended. Moving on to my next slide. So when entering in JV, you would usually set up a new Indian company with no history. So apart from confirming this fact, there is not much due diligence required on the JV entity itself. This is very different, of course, if the JV entity has already been trading, and a detailed due diligence exercise will then need to be conducted. But for the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to assume that in most cases we'll be dealing with a newco. Once you've identified the correct partner, I would always recommend that you conduct a due diligence exercise on them. So conducting a legal, taxation, reputational, litigation risk due diligence exercise is always recommended. In India, due diligence exercises are not always just paper exercises. So you can instruct people to investigate if the business is in the habit of paying bribes, taking bribes, if they have family issues, which means your contact within the family could be at risk, if the business is in the middle of any serious litigation or state investigations that could take up time and resources, if the business has any strong political affiliations and alliances, and if these will be affected by any upcoming elections. And there's a whole industry in India that can help you get to the bottom of this, and such investigations can be important and have known to put off UK JV partners and save them from a potentially toxic JV. Also remember that the Bribery Act in India is a live issue for foreign subsidiaries of a UK entry, or for generally doing business in India, and ensuring that you've asked the right questions and have the right policies in place, and that these policies are effective, is key to making sure you're protected from any equivalent civil liabilities and from reputational harm. Moving on to my next slide. Okay, so we have regularly met the chosen partner, we've established a good relationship, and the due diligence exercise has not thrown up any nasty surprises. It's now when the formal documentation is entered into and the form of JV decided. So there are three types of JV entity vehicle that I've listed here. First is a partnership, and this is created under the Partnership Act of India. Another member of the partnership, the liability of the UK partner is unlimited and is not a separate legal entity. Although there are some tax advantages to taking the partnership route, I've not come across very many in my time. Second option is the limited liability partnership concept, and it's the same concept as we have in the UK, and it provides the benefit of a limited liability to its partners and allows for very flexible arrangements pursuant to an LLP agreement. The problem with the LLP does have tax advantages, but it does require government approval. And therefore, in my experiences, UK businesses tend to avoid this if possible and tend to work towards an Indian company model with an agreed equity split. So finally, an Indian company is a universally recognized model with an independent legal identity and does put in place better employee and management structures. And an Indian company will also be able to raise funds easier and also survives a change in ownership. So moving on to my next slide. So we've decided to go with a corporate entity, and listed on this slide is the documentation that you would likely to enter into. So at this stage, for those of you not aware, it might be useful for me to mention that non-Indian lawyers and law firms are not allowed to practice or set up in India. So in India, you'll not find any UK, US, or any other non-Indian law firms. And this position is not likely to change anytime soon. So the way that we usually work is that we ensure that we have good relationships with good lawyers at various law firms throughout India. Hopefully one day when the Indian legal market does open up, we can compete directly with the Indian lawyers. But until that point, the relationships that we have built up over the years work well, and we can recommend lawyers that will provide the same level of service that you should expect from your own UK lawyers. And in terms of lawyers, in a JV scenario, the Indian lawyers would usually set up the NewCo entity and draft the Memorandum of Association and the articles, which will be project managed and inputted into by your UK lawyers. And then the JV agreement itself will usually be drafted by your UK lawyers and then blessed by the Indian lawyers from an Indian law perspective. If there is IP that is being transferred into the JV company, then it is essential that this is documented in a technology transfer agreement, and we will go into IP protection briefly towards the end of the presentation. So moving on to my next slide. So this slide details the type of provisions that you are likely to be negotiating during the legal documentation phase. I would always recommend that you try and agree most of the terms in a heads of terms agreement between the parties themselves, so that the lawyers are only documenting what you've already agreed. So the scope will set out the purpose of the JV and what it hopes to achieve. The equity split will set out how the shares in the JV will be divided. Now this might be predetermined by India's FDI rules, and I'll come to talk about these later. On a general 50-50 split, Indian businesses do like to make it 51-49 in their favour, on the basis that they're on the ground and they need control. but this can be rebalanced within the terms of the JV agreement so that the control does remain 50-50 basis. However, the Indians will get an additional percentage of profit. How will further funding rounds be dealt with? Does either party have the appetite to invest further funds if need be, and is there scope to raise bank funding? Board and the management, I'll come back to this shortly. Obligations of the party should be clearly set out. So if you've detailed the provision of funding, manufacturing site, who's providing staff, contacts, know-how, IP, so each party's obligations are clearly set out there. Also, how the profits will be split, and will there be a minimum dividend each year? To whom can the shares be transferred, and what is the process? Intra-group transfers of shares or transfers to family members are usually permitted, and deadlock provisions will come back to. So moving on to my next slide. Again, so restrictive covenants and dispute resolution, I'll deal with that in my next slide. So if you can move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so representation on the board of directors of a joint venture company is dependent upon the shareholding agreed between the joint venture parties. So in an Indian company, many corporate decisions begin and end with the board of directors. So generally, decisions of the board of directors are subject to the approval of the majority of the directors present and voting. A cause of concern is when a joint venture is between two parties, both of whom want equal representation on the board, with a view to ensuring that neither can outvote the other during a board meeting. And such equal representation may lead to deadlock situations, hampering the progress of the business of the JV entity. And under Indian law, a director has a fiduciary duty to act in accordance with the best interests of the company. However, practically, a director nominated by one of the parties is expected to be more of a lookout person who keeps an eye on the working of the company, especially if you're the UK party involved. So in order to achieve an element of control from abroad, it is usual to list a list of matters that are outside the scope of normal day-to-day working of the company that require shareholders' approval, such as appointment or removal of senior management or auditors, changing capital structures, sort of acquisitions, creating new subsidiaries, or making large capital expenses or acquisitions. In circumstances of a deadlock where each party has equal representation and neither party wishes to surrender the point, a series of deadlock resolving procedures can be put in place. An easy and common way of doing this will be to give the chairman of the board a casting vote. However, this will mean that the chairman will be in a position of control and both parties may want to appoint a chairman. This could be overcome by agreement, of course, or the chairman can be independent of the two parties, or any deadlock decisions can be determined by an independent reviewer that is predetermined by the parties. Another option would be for the role of chairman to be rotated between the two parties on an annual basis, but this obviously has its issues if there's a big decision coming up and you're not the chair, or your representative's not the chairman at that point in time. I mean, my recommendation as a foreign investor is that it's important that you do have someone on the ground who's outside of the board of directors and that's being paid directly by you and that can visit the business at random to assess what's going on at all times. We do have a number of clients that adopt this approach, and it gives them the comfort of knowing that they have a trusted individual that is looking out for their interest independently of the company. Usually these individuals are playing a similar role for numerous non-residential JV partners. Moving on to my next slide. Something to note, the Indian contract law prohibits non-compete agreements, so where an individual is restricted from freely practicing any trade or profession. And therefore, so unlike the UK, non-restriction agreements in contracts are largely unenforceable. What are enforceable are non-solicit clauses. So these are generally enforceable, and because these non-solicitation is regarded as business interference. So moving on to my next slide. IP is one of the primary considerations of a joint venture usually, and this is for a variety of reasons. So when two parties get together to form a joint venture, a foreign brand name will often be used by the JV company, and the ownership of the brand name needs to be clarified. Once a joint venture company is formed, the ownership and protection of the intellectual property that the JV company creates is usually also of prime significance. The contribution by the joint venture partners may also be in the form of some type of intellectual property in the joint venture company. As a result, intellectual property-based license or assignment agreements form the backbone of most joint ventures, and it's important that these are negotiated with great care, as a worst-case scenario, which I've seen before, is that IP that you value in the UK or in the rest of the world sits within a JV company after you're no longer involved in the JV. Moving on to the next slide. So as with any business venture, it's always advisable to have a plan in place if the JV does not work out how you intended, and there are various options that you can put in place that will provide both parties with some comfort, especially if one party has a greater vested interest in the JV than the other, and such interest means that you outgrow the other partner. A put and call option allows one shareholder to buy out another in certain predetermined circumstances. These could also be used to resolve deadlock situations and can be used as a tool to get the board to come to a conclusion on a deadlock issue before the put and call option comes into play. Other options to ultimately exit include listing of the JV on the stock market if it has done really well, a private sale, or even a liquidation of the business. Moving on to my next slide. JVs may often face disagreements between the partners. Whilst these may not always escalate to fully fledged disputes, it is wise to provide a clear mechanism for dispute resolution. Indian courts are known to take a decade to resolve a dispute, and therefore issuing and or delaying proceedings are used as commercial tactics between disputing parties. Arbitration remains a popular option. Arbitration generally tends to be more expensive than litigation, but one of the significant advantages of arbitration is that there is a reduction or elimination of delays. In India, arbitration is generally preferred for resolving commercial disputes. While awards can be challenged in the courts have begun to frown upon frivolous challenges against arbitration awards. Moving on to my next slide. So India has a foreign direct investment policy that I've touched on before, and that sets out the parameters for investment by foreign entities in India. And there was an attempt to consolidate the complex provisions in April 2012. And the details of the FDI policy of India would take me probably a whole day to take you through, but very briefly there are three main categories. So number one is the automatic route, where no prior approval of the government is required. The scope of the automatic route has been expanded by the Reserve Bank of India over the past 10 years. And in some sectors, FDI under the automatic route is limited to a percentage of investment. So for example, a foreign entity may only be able to hold 49% of the shares in a company in a certain sector, which is where a JV would come in very handy. You can go over these sectorial limits, but government approval is required. And so everything else that is not covered in the automatic route requires prior approval of the government. And then finally, there's the prohibited sectors such as atomic energy, gambling and betting, where FDI is completely prohibited from a foreign investor. So moving on to my next slide. So finally, to wrap it up, a few do's and don'ts that may come in handy when you begin your JV adventure in India. So please do be patient. Agreeing a JV can take time and may not always be the priority action of the Indian partner. The process may also involve numerous trips to a notary in the UK when setting up the Indian JV company. Picking the right Indian partner is crucial. You need to ensure that the partner has the same ambitions, visions, and working culture to make it a successful relationship. The Indian partner does not necessarily have to be in the same sector as you or your business to make it succeed, but must have the things that you do not have, such as an Indian network, distribution chain, business reputation, and contacts. Financial, legal, and commercial, and reputational due diligence is also key. Do visit your potential partner and get an understanding of their business. Make sure you're familiar with the JV partner's business and get to know the key shareholders. Ensure that you're dealing with the decision makers at all stages in the process. Also ensure that you've got well-drafted dispute resolution provisions in the JV agreement, such as arbitration provisions that we've just discussed, as a dispute in the courts can commonly take a decade to resolve. Have an exit strategy in case things go wrong, or if you just want to go it alone in India. And so finally, moving on to my final slide. Don't allow JV company to use your IP without an appropriate license so that your company retains ownership of it at all times. Don't be put off doing business in India by businesses that express interest and enthusiasm but then don't respond to your calls or emails when you get back to the UK. Finding a suitable partner can take time. Don't enter into a JV with an Indian company where there's a wide disparity between funding capabilities, as this can cause problems as the JV company looks to expand. And don't allow the Indian partner to fully control the JV company. Have a representative on the ground or visit regularly and ensure the decisions requiring the consent of both parties in the JV agreement are well defined and sufficiently protect your interests. And don't give too much weight to non-compete clauses in the JV agreement, because you still often do find them, as obviously they're largely enforceable, as we have already discussed. So yeah, thank you for that, and I'll be happy to take any questions at the end of the session, and my contact details will also be provided to all participants if anyone would like to contact me directly for any further detailed discussions. Thank you.
So thank you, Sandeep, for that most helpful insight. And for all that are listening, please do put your questions into that little question box, and we'll cover as many as we can at the end. So now to our second speaker, Tushar Chaudhary, who is based in UK Business Centre in Gurgaon near Delhi. Tushar is an engineering graduate in electronics and communication and has a master's degree in global business management. He has over 8 years' worth of work experience in business development, market research and business intelligence in India and international markets. He is head of Launchpad and Client Relations for UK and will give a brief overview of support for your business in India. So Tushar, over to you.
Thank you so much, Steve. A very good morning to everyone. My name is Tushar Chaudhary, and I take care of the Launchpad service of the UK India Business Council. I am based out of the UK IBC Business Centres in Gurgaon. Today I'll be talking about the Launchpad service of the UK IBC, which is basically a market entry service which is offered by the UK India Business Council specifically and only to the UK businesses who are trying to enter the Indian market. Now, taking my discussion forward from my fellow panelists, who really gave us a nice overview of how important it is to identify and the ways to identify a local partner. You can also use the Launchpad basically to identify this local partner if you want to enter through a JV model. So basically, Launchpad is your first step, literally your first step into the Indian market. Now, if you're looking at India as a strategic market, if you're looking at a low risk and a low cost market entry model, you don't want to waste time in identifying a right partner. You don't want to waste time in doing the company incorporation and finding a legal entity. You want to assess the business competition today, and you want to tap on the new opportunities that Indian market has to provide. If you're looking for such things, then Launchpad is basically the right solution for you. Now, if I can move on to my next slide. So like my fellow panelists mentioned about, sometimes entering India, which is quite a vast and a big market, looks very, very complex. There are too many states which looks and sounds like, various small countries, if I can call it so. There are various laws and various languages and cultural differences. The tax structure is different from one state to the other. But, if you want to ease out, and Launchpad is a platform which helps you to simplify your market entry strategy into the Indian market. And UK IBC offers this service specifically for the UK businesses. Now, one thing I would like to mention about the Launchpad, now the Launchpad trademark is being offered by CBBC, which is China British Business Council, and offered from CBBC to UK IBC. So CBBC has been offering the same service, which is a similar body like the UK IBC based out of China, which is promoting bilateral trade between Chinese and the UK businesses. So they offer the Launchpad service and have been offering the Launchpad service for more than 20 years now. And I understand that more than 200 UK businesses have used the Launchpad service successfully for their market entry into China. So now we are using their trademark in the local market. If I can move on to my next slide. So what does the Launchpad does for you? What does it mean Like I said, now Launchpad is your market entry strategy for the Indian market. The Launchpad provides you a dedicated consultant or a project manager who is an expert in your domain, who really understands the Indian market, who has got the right competencies, the right skills, who understands your services, your products, who have got the local contacts, and who has got the relevant experience to achieve your India objective. So UKIBC would most of the times would hire this project manager or the Launchpad consultant for you, and he would be on the UK India Business Council payroll, and he would work exclusively for you as your brand ambassador or as your consultant on the ground in the Indian market. It is very ideal for the UK companies who are trying to establish their presence in India and to avoid the complex process of the company incorporation and identifying the right partner, setting up the legal entity, having the physical office structure and hiring the employees, so you can bypass all these hassles and focus on the business opportunities right from day one. So the project manager plays a very, very important role in this entire relationship, who is your flag bearer and who is your brand ambassador and locally on the ground, and he is the one who can actually establish contacts and represent your company in the Indian market. Moving on to my next slide. So what are the benefits of the Launchpad? I think I'll try and answer this into two parts. One is on the administrative front, which is the Launchpad is very simple and it is extremely fast and efficient to have a local presence in India. It is the fastest way by which you can have an employee, a consultant, an expert in your industry who can represent you in the Indian market. It is very quick to set up, and one of the most important thing of the Launchpad is that even before you sign the Launchpad agreement with UK India Business Council, you know exactly what your financial commitment into the Indian market for the very first year would look like. So you know exactly well in advance how much are you investing into the local market, into the Indian market in the very first year. So there are no surprises at the end. And again, it's a low risk. It's a quick exit process in case if you have to, and there's no risk of you establishing a permanent establishment in the local market, in the Indian market. There's no requirement for you to have a legal entity established. So you can use the Launchpad without having any kind of an office representation in the Indian market. Of course, the UKIBC since hired this person on the UKIBC payroll, so the UK India Business Council will manage the HR, the bank account, the payroll of this Launchpad consultant who would work exclusively for you. And not only that, this employee would be having the flexibility to be working and to be based out of any of the 3 functional business centers which we have in the Indian market. So you can have a choice of being positioned in any of the centers, be it Gurgaon or be it Bangalore or be it Mumbai, which is the 3rd center which is coming up next month. On the second hand, now apart from the administrative support, UKIBC also offers, this Launchpad employee can take advantage of the strong ecosystem of the UK India Business Council. We have about 90 members, UK companies who are part of the UK India Business Council, across various sectors and various industries, small and big organizations, and these companies have got presence both in UK as well as in India. So this Launchpad employee, rather than reinventing the wheel, can use a UKIBC ecosystem of the membership that we have in India and in the UK, the strong relationship that we have with the UKTI, British High Commission, and the British business groups, who are equally widespread in the local market. So right from day one, this Launchpad employee can use and utilize the contacts, the relationship, and the experience which UKIBC has of doing business in India. The last but not the least point in terms of the benefit is that UK India Business Council will also do the performance management of the Launchpad employer. So we would make sure that the guy who we have jointly hired on the Launchpad is actually working in the right directions. He's actually got the right skills, and we can regularly update the client back in the UK in terms of the performance of the employee on a regular ongoing basis. If I can move on to my next slide. Right. So these are a few of the administrative support that the Launchpad employee, like any other UK IBC employee, would get while working for UK India Business Council. So all this administrative support, like the travel, housekeeping, office support, business support, using the meeting rooms, using the facilities at the business centers, are all being offered to this Launchpad employee as it would have been for for myself, for example, as a UK IBC permanent employee. Moving on to my next slide. Right. Now, also I would like to mention the do's and the don'ts that you can do on the Launchpad platform. Now, since you are using the Launchpad platform, which means that you don't have a legal entity, you don't have a permanent establishment in the local market, so there are things that you can do and there are things which you can't do. So what you can do on the Launchpad platform with the help of the Launchpad employees, the Launchpad employee can promote your brand in the Indian market. He can establish contacts with the vendors, suppliers, your potential customers, with the government bodies, for example. He can go and do networking and can identify new business opportunities for you. He can do all the stuff except the last mile. So he can't do the actual sales, which will still have to happen from UK. But apart from that, he can build a pipeline. He can grow the business account in terms of till the actual conversion into a potential into an actual customer. So he can do the feasibility study, market research, do the competitive intelligence, identify how the product or the service might behave in the local market, what the competition might look like, and give you a real on-ground understanding and the feedback what you would expect from the local customers in India. And of course, if your product or service require specific approval from the agencies or the local government, he or the Launchpad employee can actually work in terms of getting approvals and connecting with the right legal agencies, the government agencies in India. Now this is what he can do. Now coming on what he can't do, like I said earlier, because Launchpad does not attract any service tax, because there's no permanent establishment, and Launchpad has been shown as an export service from UK IBC directly to the client in the UK. So it does not involve or does not attract any service tax, and there's no legal entity. So you can't use the Launchpad platform for doing any commercial activities. You can't use the Launchpad platform for signing JVs, can't use the Launchpad platform for issuing invoices and for raising checks, or you can't use as a profit center. You cannot claim, because the employee is actually employee of the UK India Business Council who is working exclusively for you. Still, you cannot claim to have an employer working for you in India. Now this employee is based on the UK IBC business centers in India, so you cannot claim to have an office for you in India. Now, these are the things which you can't do, a very a thin line between the do's and the don'ts on the Launchpad. Now moving on to my next slide. Now, yeah, so we have the UK India Business Council has expanded us. We have expanded in the last 1 year now. We opened the first center where I'm based at in Gurgaon in September last year, and from last year till now we have 4 clients on the Launchpad, which is again cross-sector. Clutton's is into financial services, into infrastructure company. AOC, Association of Colleges, UK, and KCL, King's College London, are from the education sector. And Molecular Products is a family-owned business based out of UK. So these are 4 Launchpad clients we have at the moment on the UK IBC platform. Moving on to my next slide. Like I said earlier, this Launchpad employee will have the flexibility of being positioned in any of the 3 business centers which we have in India, and we have plans to open 6 centers in total in by 2017. At the moment we have got 2. This is the Gurgaon center where I am working, where I am currently speaking from. This is the Infinity Tower, Tower B, and it is about 25 kilometers from the international airport, Delhi. So it's very close, and it's very heart of the business hubs in Delhi and NCR region. Moving on to the next slide. These are few of the pictures of the business center where I am based at in Gurgaon. You will see, we not only have the hot desking or the cabins, but we also have enough large training rooms. We have event space where you can do networking events or conduct roundtables, conferences at the UK IBC Business Center. It's very, very important for the universities or training, or if you provide any kind of training to where you can use the UK IBC Business Centers for offering these services. Moving on to my next slide. Again, continuing with a few of the pictures for the UK IBC Business Center. This is the one building that you see on your extreme right corner is the Bangalore Center, which we have opened recently in July this year. Moving on to the next slide. Again, you will see a few more pictures of how the centers look like. The extreme left is a building, and then you see the workstations on the right-hand side, which is, again, the Launchpad clients can use for their employees. On the next slide, this is the third center, which is going to come up on December, and it is going to be inaugurated on 9th of December in Mumbai. This is where we're going to be, and this is work in progress at the moment. So this is the three centers that we have: Gurgaon, Bangalore, and Mumbai. Additionally, we'll also have 3 more centers in Chennai, Calcutta, and Hyderabad in 2 years' time. So thank you so much. I hope you would enjoy this information. If you want to have any further doubts and questions, please feel free to get in touch with me, and I'm happy to take any questions further. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Tushar, and thank you for the questions from all the listeners coming in. I have quite a lot to get through, so I'm afraid I won't be able to go through them all, but we will answer all questions that are posted, so please continue to put them on the panel there. And we will be sending out and emailing the presentations to all attendees, so you will get a copy of this. So some interesting points raised. Could I come over to you first, Sandy? Question for you. How are joint ventures usually funded?
How are joint ventures usually funded? It usually depends. Well, it's usually a commercial agreement between the parties. So both parties will agree to invest a total amount of money that will sort of be put together in the pot to get the business up and running. And how that's usually divided, and from my experience, UK businesses, you tend to put in a lot less cash than the Indian businesses. So what the UK businesses tend to bring to the party is their product, their know-how, their branding, and the processes, and help setting up the factory. And usually the Indian client have already got an industrial unit set up, or they've got partial business set up that they then utilize for this new business. So it all depends on each individual arrangement, but usually I would say the Indian probably puts in more cash, and any cash that the UK business does put in will be via equity for your own shares. So again, it depends really on the commercial arrangements between the parties, I would say.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And another question for you, whilst we're talking directly. You mentioned that India is a very provincial place. i.e., the states have their different traditions and ways of doing business. Can you give us an idea as to which Indian states do businesses from the UK tend to favour, and what are perceived as the business-friendly states at this moment in time? And if you think that will, I'll just add my little point on the end of that, if you think that will change, will more states become more business-friendly as well?
Yeah, I think so. From my experience, and it depends on what sector you're in, really, because I think India, various sectors, various states favour various sectors. But generally, the state of Gujarat is a very business-friendly state, and is known to have the friendliest business environment. And that's partially due to the policies of the ex-Chief Minister, Narendra Modi, who's now Prime Minister. And he's kind of done very well in the state of Gujarat. And, you go in there, you can set up a company within Gujarat within 4 weeks, whereas generally speaking in the rest of India, it probably takes around 12. So they've got, their processes aligned. There's less bureaucracy across the state of Gujarat. Gujarat, and it's hoped now that because Narendra Modi is the Prime Minister, that he'll instill that across the whole of India now. And so, it'll make India a much easier place to do business, and so state by state shouldn't make any difference. But I'd still say Gujarat is still one of the best states to do businesses, and most business friendly, and one where a lot of UK businesses tend to head towards. And also Bangalore as well, I suppose that's attracted a lot of IT and engineering type businesses there as well, because of the infrastructure they've got set up there for those types of businesses.
Okay, thank you for that. There's an interesting one here that's come through from another one of our listeners. So you mentioned the investment processes. We hear about Mauritius and Singapore.
Yeah.
Now, when these and that these are sort of the conduit for lots of investment, FDI into India. Do you recommend investing via those avenues, and why would you do that as opposed to not doing it directly from the UK?
Number one, I'm a lawyer, so I can't really give out financial advice. But speaking from experience, we have had clients that invest via Mauritius or via Singapore or via another country that has a double taxation treaty with India. And from as far as I understand, what it usually does, it means that you pay very little capital gains tax when you exit. I know the Indian government have been looking to close these loopholes for some time now, but as with everything in India, it does take time. So it is looked at negatively in the press, but it is something that a lot of big business and small businesses are considering. But I'm not really the right person to advise on that. But I would recommend speaking to sort of your accountants or financial advisors, or I can put you in touch with people that can give you a bit more detail on why that structure is a good idea from a tax perspective. But from a JV perspective, it makes no difference where you make that investment from.
Okay, thanks, Sandy. That's very clear. Just one for you, Tushar. That's here. You mentioned about getting set up very quickly with this, so you can have through the Launchpad program. How much time does it actually take to hire the consultant, and can you give us some indication as to the salary range that might be expected for different levels of capability?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the time frame, I think it takes anywhere about 3 to 4 months after we have got an interest from the company who's happy to sign the agreement. So we take 3 or 4 months from that date. That is the time required by which we can have the employee who can come on board. With respect to the salary, which is quite a tricky question, I would say, but just to give, because the Launchpad is most of the times a single man army, and you would need a person who is experienced, with the right skills, and enough who is sensible and he can take important decisions and give the right feedback to the client. So we usually expect a consultant to have at least 12 to 15 years of work experience, and that really quite ranges from and the salary ranges from industry to industry. But on an average, I would say about 12 years or 15 years of work experience, we can expect a salary of a range of about £25,000 to £28,000 annual salary.
Okay, thanks, Tushar. It's and I think there's been some work in China with regards to how long Launchpad employees tend to stay with such an organisation as ourselves. Have you got some idea as to how long you think that we will have these people working with us on this program?
Well, on the Launchpad, depends on what the company objectives and what the long-term and the medium and the short-term plans are. But the minimum contract time for the Launchpad is 1 year. So that's the minimum time which any company who signed the Launchpad agreement will have to stick to with UKIBC. And then based on the outcome of the program and what have been achieved in those 12 months, the company can take a call to set up their own entity after 1 year, or they can continue to renew the Launchpad contract for 1 more year after the first year. And then it depends on how the progression is made. So the company can decide to do the company incorporation after end of 2 years, or can still renew the contract for 1 more year.
Okay, so we're running out of time, I'm afraid, but I've got a couple more questions Maybe we can just keep these with Sandeep on the subject of joint ventures. Sandeep, can you give us some indication as to the typical success rate of joint ventures and in India?
I think offhand, most of them have been successful. So as a rough guess from the ones I've worked on over the past 8 years, I'd say it's probably about 70% that are successful first time, and usually the ones that fall into the 30% category, then at the end of their first JV, they've already found the second partner that they think is more suitable, and that's the reason it fails, because then they move in. But it's very few UK JV partners that I've come across that have gone into India and then completely pulled out and not continued in the market. It's usually they've picked a bad partner in the first instance and they've then had to choose somebody else. But that unraveling can be difficult, so it is important to try to get it right first time.
And one final question for you. How long typically does it take, once somebody's selected a partner, how long typically does you find it takes to set up the arrangement? And are there any sort of indicative costs associated with outset setup costs that would be relevant or worth mentioning here?
In terms of the time taken, so let's say once you've picked your partner, and depending which state you're setting up, it usually will take from about 4 to 12 weeks to set up the actual JV company. And during that period, you'd be able to negotiate your sort of JV and your articles and association and the IP docs. Indian corporates and family-run businesses do tend to work well. They're not working slower. They've just potentially got a lot more work on than we probably have here, and they do tend to take longer to make decisions. And it's only the key family members that can make the key decisions. So things do unfortunately drag out. So I would say, on average, from start to finish, it would probably take you about 4 months, maybe to 5 months, 6 months, at the extreme level. And in terms of costs, from a UK perspective, I think from a very basic JV, because of the cost associated with setting up an Indian business, which is much more than it would cost here, for a basic JV that's very straightforward, you don't want to go into too much detail, it would be, in terms of fees, it would be around £3,000. But then, if you've got a very complex JV with a lot of IP, and you're putting in quite a significant amount of money, you can spend anything up to about £30,000. So there's a massively wide spread, and it just depends on the size of your business. But I'd say average is around about 5,000 to 7,000.
Very good. Thank you, Sandeep, and thank you, Tushar. So my takeaway from this is that whilst JVs have been problematic in other markets, in India they can provide a very useful way to gain access to distribution networks and existing relationships. But the key thing is to invest your time to find the right potential partner. Once that's in place, well, from Sandeep's take on it, up to 70% of these come to successful fruition and move forward. So thank you very much for your time, and I hope this webinar was valuable to you. If you have any feedback or comments about today's session, or a session that you'd want to see us do in the future, please do feel free to get in touch. And we will answer all questions that we didn't get a chance to get to during that Q&A session. Okay, thank you for joining us. Goodbye.